Final Fantasy XIII is as controversial today as it was back in 2010. It is the only numbered entry in the long-running series that hasn't yet received the HD remaster treatment, and this is a shame because there's a lot of potential here. Those of us who did experience the 13 trilogy in its entirety can tell you that it's absolutely worth your time, and this would be even more true if they bumped up the frame rate and added some modern quality of life improvements. But for today, let's just focus on Lightning's first adventure, Final Fantasy XIII. You may remember it as the linear one, or the corridor simulator, or the one where the auto battle does all the work for you. Now in my mind, this sort of parroted opinion is where the internet is a bit like a school playground.
As usual, the playground has the facts right but missed the point entirely.
Over Christmas, I got a lovely new Xbox Series X, and for the first time in over 10 years, I was able to replay Final Fantasy XIII in sweet, crisp 4K. And I can tell you that this game has so much more going for it than I remembered. It's not a perfect game by any means, I do still have a lot of issues with it, but there's a lot to love here too. So join me today as I'm Backlog Baldy, and these are 10 things, some good and some bad, that I learned when I replayed Final Fantasy XIII. Without a doubt, 13 is the hardest of the Final Fantasy series. The game over screen can appear in an instant, much like the You Died screen in a Souls game, and ironically, I saw it way more here than I ever did in Stranger of Paradise, the literal Final Fantasy Souls-like. The heart of 13 is the battle system, and as fantastic as it is, it can be brutally unforgiving if you make the wrong move, especially once you reach Grand Pulse. In the sequel, they greatly increased the fluidity of the whole system, most notably in when you shift your paradigms, and whilst it's still challenging, it resulted in a much more forgiving battle experience. In 13, every action has a very deliberate feel to it, and it forces you to really think about your next move. Your first paradigm shift is the prime example here, because in every battle, your first shift always takes the longest, and it's on you to decide when you can allow yourself that window of vulnerability. Whilst you can absolutely smash through huge groups and massive enemies if you approach them right, make no mistake, even the most common of mob battles can wipe you out hard if you don't. I cannot overstate how gorgeous this game is, even now. It looks and feels more in line with a late-stage AAA PS4 game than a midlife Xbox 360 title. When I fired up 13.2 afterwards, it was still very pretty to look at on my Series X, but it was noticeably less polished than its older sibling. The good folks over at Squeenix made an absolute stunner with this one, and if it ever does get remastered, it really won't need much touching up at all. The characters look absolutely spectacular, in cutscenes, in the field, and even their in-battle models also. Everything blends seamlessly together, and the cinematography in cutscenes is done so well, even if the content of said scenes does set your cringeometer off the scale. More on this later. Final Fantasy XIII was truly ahead of its time presentation-wise. Oh, and I love that your character's hair and clothing is always being caressed by a lovely light breeze, even when you're indoors. On to our first negative. To address the linear elephant in the room, the corridor elements were never the problem. Final Fantasy X is also incredibly linear, but everyone loved it so much that the linear nature was barely in the narrative. The problem with 13 is what actually happens in those linear elements, and I can't say it any other way. 13 has atrocious pacing. You'll trek on through a section, have 20 or so minutes of usually satisfying battles, and then stop for some cutscenes, and then repeat the process. It just doesn't flow very well, and it can be very jarring. None of the story and character progression feels organic. You never get to navigate a town or a non-combat area with your comrades, and everything just feels like it's forced into sudden, over-the-top melodramatic moments that always stop you from experiencing the actual gameplay. It's like someone literally keeps slamming on the brakes on your journey and talking at you for 10 straight minutes. That said, however, it's not always the fault of the cutscenes, because some gameplay sections just plain suck. Chapter 7 in particular was the one that I ended up largely skipping. Most battles and sections in this game are designed intelligently enough that they cater to your party at the time, and you can usually approach them in a few different satisfying ways. Some of them, however, are just a pain. They can be really tedious and frustrating, and not all of them reward you in proportion to how much effort they were, and it's of no real consequence if you just pop a Decepticol and run past all the enemies. See again, Chapter 7. Okay, so, knowing how the story ends, I was a lot more sympathetic to each character from the start. But even then, my god, I just wanted to shake and or slap most of them for most of the first 2 acts of the game. They are all so stubborn and too damn slow to get over themselves. Hope is a famously whiny little but he loses his mother in the opening hour of the game. Are you telling me that you'd cope any better? His whininess then manifests in murderous revenge fantasies. Again, how would you deal with his circumstances? I don't know how I would. All of that being said, and whilst my sympathy for this sort of situation in real life isn't in question, it's whether I value it in a piece of entertainment, and my answer is...
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
So whilst this is very accurate in how real people overcome real problems, that's not what I want in a video game. You can still convey depth of feeling without making the audience want to drop the kid off at the nearest fire station. Better writing could have streamlined all of this, and incorporating character development more organically into the progression of the game could have made it feel a lot less tedious. Snow's story in particular really grinds my gears, and I skipped a fair few of his scenes because I just didn't care. And it says a lot that I don't think I missed anything crucial by skipping those scenes either. The conversations in 13.2 were done much better, and you can tell that this is a lesson that Square Enix learned the hard way. Anybody who says that you can auto-battle your way through the game either didn't bother playing past the first few chapters, or they need to immediately buy a lottery ticket, because the RNG gods are clearly massively biased in their favour. The first 2 chapters of the game are awful, make no mistake about it. They are by far the worst offenders of awful pacing, and your cast of melodramatic misfits don't even have powers yet, so the battles are pretty boring too. However, enter Chapter 3, the Frozen Lake of Crystal, the complete change in music and tone, having access to paradigms and different roles. Suddenly, you have choice, and bigger enemy groups, and bosses that can and will kill you outright if you think that you can just power through them with relentless assault. Now you have elements of freedom and challenges to drive you, and it's just a taste of things to come. The next few chapters that force you to pair up just 2 characters at a time or so are actually quite brilliant, because they force you to think of different paradigm combos that play to each character's strengths and your enemy's weaknesses. Not all job roles are created equal after all. Like how Lightning can be a healer, but she doesn't get Kira until much later on than Hope or Vanille do. And how both Hope and Saz can be synergists, but Saz gets haste much earlier in the game than anybody else. Sure, you'll still use auto battle a lot when you pick a paradigm, but timing matters, so you can't just hammer the buttons and hope for the best. The Lightning and Hope chapters owe a lot of their survival to being able to juggle enemies in the air after all. Also, remember potions? Those things that you used in the first 2 chapters? Well, your health won't actually jump up all that much until you reach Grand Pulse. So until then, why not give your party leader a Doctor's Code accessory and have them spam potions to heal? It speeds up early battles a lot, and at only 50 gil per potion, it's not expensive to do so. And easily one of my favourite elements about all of this, you hardly, if ever, need to grind for levels. Your characters and their enemies just don't make that kind of leap until Grand Pulse, and unlike most other games with RPG systems, the required XP that you need doesn't go up the higher in level you are. Your Crystarium costs go up, sure, but they stay the same until the next expansion. I didn't need to grind at all until Grand Pulse, and even then I managed to find a very sweet loop that filled the primary roles in about 2 hours, because the cost never got any higher, and I wish other RPGs, cough Elden Ring, would take a leaf out of this book too. In summary, the battle system rewards understanding and experimentation, and it's tremendously satisfying when you get it right. I will die on this hill if I have to. Final Fantasy XII is a masterpiece, and the Zodiac Age Remaster is one of the few games in the series I have made the effort to platinum. The job system plus the gambits was a genius combination, and the sprawling open maps and real-time battles, which flowed all the better for having automated conditional commands queued up, all gelled together into a truly deep, mature and rewarding experience. And whilst 13 gave us a deep and multi-layered combat system, that combined epic cinematography with an essential element of strategic thinking, the rest of the game paled in comparison to what came before. And so much of that freedom, choice, exploration and thrill of discovery was taken away from us. Obviously 13 was still way more pretty than previous entries, but if we learned anything from the Star Wars prequels, it's that you can't skate by on just being pretty. You need heart, you need a rewarding experience, you need likable characters, you need good writing, and all the things Final Fantasy was usually setting the standard for. Thankfully from 13.2 onwards, the good folks at Square Enix seemed to learn their lesson, and we've been given the respect we deserve as consumers and long-time fans of the series, admittedly to varying degrees of success.
Hello, Your Highness. Congrats on your wedding.
No, God!
But we've never had another title as stripped back as 13 since. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is another in the series I have the Platinum for, and it's pretty much universally beloved. But did anything in 7 seem familiar at all? Like how in combat you need to stagger enemies before you can do real damage, and certain characters and certain moves are better for building the stagger meter, and some are better at doing post-stagger damage. No? Okay, how about when you level up your weapons? Does this look at all like a Crystarium to you? Okay, so how about Final Fantasy XVI? Another example of absolutely spectacular combat built entirely on a framework of stagger then damage? 13 might have stumbled out of the gate, but its building blocks were solid, and Square Enix knew this, which leads me to... No two Final Fantasies can be accused of being the same. Square Enix have always pushed the boat out when trying to make each title feel distinct, even with them sharing the same DNA. Back in the day, it was all about turn-based battles, but after 10, they clearly wanted to give us something different. After the success of Advent Children, there was a big focus on delivering cinematically pleasing battles, and 13 was the first real attempt at that. And whilst the reception to 13 was tepid in places, I say full credit to them because they didn't throw it all out and start again. They knew they had a good formula, it just needed tweaking, and you only have to play 13.2 to see how much they took fan feedback on board, but also managed to work it into their vision. The DNA of the battle system was identical, but it was much faster and far more pleasing in so many ways. Buckling under fan feedback is something that happens all too often nowadays. Square Enix believed in their vision and stuck to their guns, but they also met the fans in the middle, and you've got to respect that. I commented earlier on the development of the characters and their issues being too real, and it all feeds directly off the overarching plot. Pulse and Cocoon live in constant fear of each other because their manipulative falsy overlords tell them to fear their neighbour. Entire towns are condemned to death because they might have come into contact with Lassie, basically someone who's different. People turn on each other in an instant over xenophobic, fear-fed bull and instantly sever any human contact purely out of fear of what they don't even try to understand. This is a horrific story in places, particularly in a post-9/11 War on Terror era. But now, let's close this list out with something a bit lighter, shall we? Okay, so this one was obvious at the time, but replaying 13 after the 7 remake really did make me laugh at just how blatant this was. Cloud is both an iconic character and a license to print money. So yeah, with Lightning, they went back to the weather. They made her moody, gave her a cool sword, made her an elite soldier type, and gave her cool hair. Too subtle? Okay, well, how about we start the game on a train, and maybe fight a big-ass robot scorpion monster? Ah yes, but where is Sephiroth, I hear you cry? Don't worry, they put him in the sequels. Thankfully by the end of the trilogy, Lightning more than carved out her own identity. I mean, she literally fights God, remakes the universe, and retires to France. I'm not sure how Cloud is going to wrap things up at the end of Part 3, but I don't think it's going to be quite the same. And that, my dear Final Fantasy fandom, concludes my list. Please do fire into those comments everything that you agree and disagree with about my list, and let me know your thoughts on this divisive but excellent addition to the series. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and maybe even subscribing to my channel. It helps enormously with the algorithm and it gives me a warm, happy feeling too. My next video is going to be all about 10 iconic video games that I believe are overdue for a remake, and I hope to see you all there. Thank you very much for watching. Baldy, out.